Middle East power shift, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the future of the Gulf.
Welcome to The Bigger Perspective.
The night would begin quietly. Financial screens flicker before sunrise in Tokyo. Oil traders in London notice futures climbing. In Washington and Tel Aviv, emergency briefings move from theoretical to immediate. Then the headline spreads across the globe. The United States and Israel have launched coordinated strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. Within minutes, the world is holding its breath. Because this will not simply be a military operation. It will be a geopolitical earthquake, a decision sending pressure waves through energy markets, alliance systems, military postures, and the fragile architecture of international order. The question would not just be what was hit, the question would be, what happens next? Iran's nuclear program has shaped Middle Eastern politics for more than 2 decades. Tehran insists its enrichment activities are for civilian energy and medical research. Israel and Western governments argue that enrichment capacity shortens the pathway to a weapon. Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Inspections have fluctuated, agreements have been signed and later abandoned. Sanctions have tightened and loosened. For Israel, the issue is existential. For the United States, it is strategic. For Iran, it is sovereignty and deterrence. This is not a simple dispute. It is layered with history, mistrust, ideology, and power politics. Scenario 1. A limited, contained strike. The objective: delay nuclear capability. No regime change, no ground invasion, a narrow military action followed by diplomatic recalibration. Iran's response becomes the critical variable. If escalation threatens regime stability, Tehran may choose symbolic retaliation, but avoid full confrontation. Markets react instantly. Roughly 20% of the world's seaborne oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Even perceived instability can move prices dramatically. Energy futures surge, shipping insurance rises. Global headlines intensify. But if escalation remains contained, markets stabilize. The world absorbs the shock. Scenario 2. Regional escalation. Iran maintains a significant missile inventory and regional partnerships. Retaliatory strikes could target Israel directly or US bases across the Gulf. Shipping slows. Air defense systems activate. Civil aviation reroutes. Energy markets do not simply spike, they destabilize. Fuel prices rise, inflation intensifies. Central banks face renewed pressure. Emerging economies feel the strain first. Conflicts rarely widen by grand design. They widen through miscalculation. A missile misses its target. A response is misinterpreted. An escalation unfolds that no one initially intended. Scenario 3. A deeper strategic shift. If facilities are heavily damaged, Tehran could conclude that vulnerability invites attack. Instead of retreating from nuclear capability, it may accelerate underground development. The global non-proliferation regime weakens. Regional powers reassess their own deterrent strategies. International rules are tested. When preventive force becomes normalized, global order shifts. The focus begins with oil, but it does not end there. Shipping insurers reprice risk, freight costs climb, supply chains slow. Manufacturing, aviation, agriculture all feel pressure. Households feel it at the pump. Then at the grocery store, inflation spreads quietly. Conflict in one region becomes cost worldwide. Geopolitics can feel abstract. Missiles, markets, alliances. But beneath strategy lies human consequence. Families watching the sky, flights cancelled, schools closed, military families across multiple nations bracing for deployment. What do we know? Energy markets react rapidly to Gulf instability. Iran retains retaliatory capability. Alliances would be tested immediately. What we do not know is how leaders under pressure would calculate risk. A strike on Iran's nuclear program would not be isolated. It would be a stress test of global systems, energy security, alliance credibility, non-proliferation norms, market stability. Wars begin with explosions, but their consequences echo in supply chains, diplomatic chambers, defense budgets, and household expenses thousands of miles away. In an interconnected world, no major conflict is ever local. And when the first aircraft turns toward its target, it is not only the region that holds its breath, the world does too.
Does Iran insist on advancing its nuclear program, even under years of sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and the threat of military confrontation? And why are the United States, Israel, much of Europe, and several regional powers determined to stop it? At first glance, it appears to be a simple dispute about nuclear weapons. But the reality is more complex. It is a story shaped by Cold War politics, revolution, regional rivalry, international law, energy security, and mutual distrust that has built up over decades. Understanding this issue requires stepping back from headlines and rhetoric. It requires looking at how Iran's nuclear ambitions began, how they evolved, and why different actors interpret them in fundamentally different ways. Iran's nuclear program did not begin in defiance of the West. It began with Western support. In the 1950s, under the US Atoms for Peace initiative, the United States helped Iran develop civilian nuclear technology. At the time, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a close American ally. The goal was energy diversification and scientific development. That cooperation ended after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, when the Shah was overthrown and Iran became an Islamic republic under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Relations with the United States collapsed, especially after the US Embassy hostage crisis. Throughout the 1980s, during the devastating Iran-Iraq War, Iran felt strategically isolated. Iraq used chemical weapons during the conflict, and international response was limited. Many analysts argue that this period shaped Iranian leadership's long-term security thinking. Survival became central. In the 1990s and early 2000s, concerns intensified when previously undeclared nuclear facilities were revealed in Natanz and Arak. The International Atomic Energy Agency began investigating compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran had signed in 1968. In 2015, after years of negotiations, Iran and 6 world powers signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The deal limited Iran's uranium enrichment levels, reduced its stockpile, and imposed strict inspections in exchange for sanctions relief. In 2018, the United States withdrew from the agreement, reimposed sanctions, and Iran gradually resumed higher levels of enrichment. That withdrawal marked a turning point. Trust eroded further, and the diplomatic framework weakened. At the heart of this dispute lies a central question. Is Iran pursuing nuclear weapons, or is it exercising its legal right to peaceful nuclear energy? Iran's official position is consistent. It states that its nuclear program is for civilian purposes, particularly electricity generation and medical research. Iranian leaders often emphasize that nuclear weapons are religiously prohibited under a fatwa reportedly issued by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, countries are allowed to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, provided they comply with inspection requirements and do not pursue weapons. Iran argues that it is asserting its sovereign rights. It also contends that sanctions are unjust and politically motivated. Critics, however, raise several concerns. Uranium enrichment is a dual-use technology. The same process that produces fuel for nuclear power plants can, at higher purity levels, produce material suitable for weapons. In recent years, the International Atomic Energy Agency has confirmed that Iran has enriched uranium to levels significantly higher than those required for civilian power generation. Second, Iran has previously failed to disclose certain facilities and activities, raising questions about transparency. From Israel's perspective, the concern is existential. Israeli officials argue that a nuclear-armed Iran would fundamentally alter regional security. The United States frames the issue around non-proliferation and regional stability. European countries generally support diplomatic solutions and have attempted to preserve elements of the 2015 agreement. Experts remain divided. Some argue Iran's nuclear progress is a bargaining tool. Others believe Iran seeks at least the capability to build a weapon quickly if needed. The International Atomic Energy Agency has not publicly concluded that Iran is currently building a nuclear weapon. However, it has documented enrichment levels that reduce the time required to produce weapons-grade material if a decision were made. That ambiguity fuels mistrust on all sides.
This issue matters far beyond Iran. If Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons, many analysts believe it could trigger a regional arms race. Countries such as Saudi Arabia have indicated they would seek similar capabilities if Iran crossed that threshold. The Middle East already faces overlapping conflicts involving proxy forces, regional rivalries, and external powers. There are also economic implications. Sanctions on Iran affect global oil markets. Iran possesses some of the world's largest proven oil and gas reserves. Alliances are also at stake. The nuclear issue intersects with broader geopolitical competition. At its core, this is not only about nuclear technology, it is about trust, credibility, and regional balance of power. As of recent public reports, Iran continues enriching uranium beyond the limits set by the 2015 agreement. Negotiations to restore or replace the agreement have faced repeated setbacks. The International Atomic Energy Agency continues monitoring, though access levels have fluctuated. Sanctions remain in place, significantly impacting Iran's economy. No formal agreement currently governs Iran's program in the way the 2015 deal once did. The situation remains dynamic but unresolved. The question of Iran's nuclear ambitions is not a simple clash of good and bad actors. It is a layered conflict shaped by history, fear, strategy, and power. Iran sees security, sovereignty, and leverage. Its critics see proliferation, risk, and regional instability. Between those positions lies a fragile space where diplomacy competes with distrust. In the nuclear age, capability alone can shift the balance of power, and when trust is scarce, even ambiguity can become a source of tension. The future of this dispute remains uncertain. but its roots and its implications are clear enough to demand careful attention. For decades, the Strait of Hormuz was discussed in the language of contingency. War games modeled its closure. Intelligence briefings analyzed its vulnerabilities. Energy economists calculated its exposure risk. It was the world's most dangerous maritime choke point. In theory. That theory has now collided with reality. Military confrontation in the Gulf has moved beyond covert exchanges and calibrated deterrence. Air defense systems are active. Naval assets are maneuvering with operational intent. Strategic messaging has hardened into visible engagement. Diplomatic channels remain open, but they no longer dominate events. And at the center of global concern lies a narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman. At its narrowest point, just 21 miles across, the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through this corridor each day. A substantial share of global liquefied natural gas exports follows the same route. For many economies, this is not an optional pathway. It is foundational infrastructure. This conflict is not solely about territorial or ideological rivalry. It is a stress test of the modern global system, an examination of how tightly interconnected economies respond when one of their most vital arteries comes under strain. Tonight, we assess the military realities, the market reactions, the geopolitical recalibrations, and the structural consequences now unfolding. Calmly, strategically, without exaggeration. On a global map, the Strait of Hormuz appears narrow and unremarkable. In the architecture of energy logistics, it is indispensable. Between 17 and 20 million barrels of oil transit this corridor daily. Gulf producers rely on it to reach global markets. Much of the world's spare production capacity is concentrated within this same region. The vulnerability is not new. During the 1980s tanker war, oil shipments were attacked repeatedly amid the Iran-Iraq conflict. And yet, despite intense hostility, full closure never materialized. What differs today is not geography, but capability and connectivity. Missile systems are more advanced. Drone warfare is more precise. Cyber operations now accompany kinetic force. Total closure of the strait would be operationally difficult, but systemic shock does not require total closure. It requires friction, delays, insurance withdrawal, escalating threat perception. The power of the strait lies not only in its oil flow, but in the leverage created by uncertainty. Open hostilities alter maritime calculations immediately. Commercial vessels operate under heightened risk protocols. War risk insurance premiums surge. Shipping companies reassess schedules. The strategic objective for global naval actors is not territorial dominance. It is continuity of commerce. The strait does not need to be sealed to be contested, and contested transit is sufficient to create economic tremors. Energy markets are highly responsive to geopolitical risk. When a primary supply route faces credible threat, oil prices adjust immediately. Strategic petroleum reserves can moderate short-term spikes, but reserves are finite tools. They provide breathing space, not permanent insulation. Markets can withstand shock. What they struggle to absorb is prolonged unpredictability. Duration more than intensity determines whether conflict becomes economic restructuring. Conflict in the Gulf triggers calculations far beyond the region. Systemic maritime collapse benefits no one. Energy interdependence creates an unusual paradox. Even rivals share incentive to prevent total breakdown. Short disruptions test resilience. Extended conflict reshapes architecture. This is not collapse, it is adaptation. Behind every barrel statistic stands a household. If oil prices remain elevated, transportation costs increase. Food prices follow, maritime security becomes domestic economics, quietly, systemically, persistently. History suggests that sustained total closure of major choke points is uncommon, yet uncertainty persists. The line between calculated restraint and unintended escalation is thin, and thin lines carry disproportionate consequence when global systems are tightly interconnected. The Strait of Hormuz is more than a shipping route. It is a symbol of the delicate architecture of global stability. War may begin regionally, but in a deeply interconnected system, consequences rarely remain confined. The strait is small, its leverage is immense, and in a world bound together by narrow corridors and shared dependencies, stability is never automatic. It is sustained deliberately.
Tehran wakes to a different sky. Before sunrise, currency traders in Dubai refresh their screens. The Riyadh slips again. Oil futures in Singapore jump within minutes. In Brussels and Washington, secure rooms fill quietly. Phones vibrate, briefings begin. Airspace over parts of Iran narrows. Commercial routes shift south. Insurance premiums for tankers moving through the Gulf tick upward. Military radar systems across the region move to heightened monitoring. Not panic, not yet, but readiness. In apartment blocks across Tehran, Isfahan and Mashhad, families stare at television screens. The same announcement plays again and again. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and several senior figures are confirmed dead following coordinated strikes. For nearly half a century, Iran's political system has revolved around a single axis of authority. Now, that axis is gone. The question is no longer about retaliation, it is deeper than that. What happens to a theocratic state built around clerical supremacy when its central figure disappears overnight? Tonight, we examine the leadership vacuum, the internal power struggle, and the possible futures facing Iran. Because the outcome will matter far beyond its borders. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran's political system has fused elected institutions with clerical oversight. The supreme leader stands above the president, above parliament, above the courts. The position commands the armed forces and shapes foreign policy. It is not symbolic, it is decisive. Ayatollah Khamenei has held that position since 1989, 35 years of continuity in a region often defined by upheaval. Iran does possess a constitutional mechanism for succession, the Assembly of Experts, an 88-member clerical body tasked with appointing a new supreme leader. The procedure exists on paper. What is uncertain is how it unfolds under shock, external pressure, and sudden leadership loss. History offers different outcomes. The death of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989 resulted in managed continuity. The collapse of Iraq's Ba'athist regime in 2003 produced fragmentation. The difference lies not in the moment, but in the institutions surrounding it. In a controlled outcome, the Assembly of Experts moves quickly. Within days, an interim clerical council is announced. Security forces deploy visibly. But without mass repression, state media emphasizes continuity. The Revolutionary Guard pledges loyalty to the constitutional process. Markets react cautiously. Oil prices jump briefly, then stabilize as tanker traffic continues. Diplomatic channels remain open, even adversarial ones. In this scenario, the Revolutionary Guard influences the choice of successor, but does not formally seize power. The system bends, but it does not break. Now imagine a different chain of events. The Assembly of Experts delays. Clerical factions leak rival claims. Protests expand beyond major cities. Security responses harden. Regional actors grow uneasy. Borders tighten. Surveillance intensifies. Oil markets react again. Shipping insurance rises. Airlines reroute. Here is the deeper question. What happens if authority fragments not at the edges, but at the center? In that environment, the Revolutionary Guard could step forward as the primary stabilizing force. A shift from clerical supremacy to overt military dominance. Beyond immediate turmoil lies a longer horizon. If Iran transitions toward stronger military authority, regional power balances begin to recalibrate. Neighboring states accelerate defense spending. The logic of deterrence sharpens. Energy markets adjust. Investment shifts. Strategic doctrines evolve. Moments like this quietly reshape international norms. Energy prices matter in charts. They matter more at fuel pumps. Nairobi, Mumbai, Berlin, Sao Paulo. Inside Iran, uncertainty weighs heavier. Currency volatility affects savings. Businesses hesitate. Families watch debates they cannot influence. The removal of a long-standing leader does not end a system overnight. It tests it. It reveals its depth, its fractures, its resilience. For Iran, this moment could reinforce continuity or accelerate transformation. For the region, the stakes lie in balance. For global markets, stability. For ordinary citizens, predictability. Power vacuums do not exist in isolation. They echo outward, through alliances, through economies, through perceptions of strength and vulnerability. Conflicts may begin with force, but what follows is shaped by choices. Deliberate, cautious, human choices. And those consequences travel far beyond the moment that created them. It begins with urgency. Carrier strike groups reposition in the Arabian Sea. Missile defense batteries activate across the Gulf. Oil traders in London watch futures climb before sunrise. Insurance rates for tankers inch upward. Commercial airlines redraw flight paths around contested airspace. In Washington, briefings stretch late into the night. In Tehran, state television projects resolve, while military convoys move quietly along desert highways. Social media fills with speculation. Families stock fuel, markets hesitate. The first exchange is sharp, limited, targeted. But as days pass, the question shifts. Not whether strikes occurred, not even who struck harder. The real question becomes, how long could this last? Because modern wars between major states rarely unfold according to initial plans. They expand, narrow, stall, escalate, freeze, and reshape themselves. Tonight, we examine the duration dynamics of a potential Iran-United States conflict, and what weeks, months, or longer would mean for the global system. A direct war between Iran and the United States would not resemble conventional invasions of the past century. Geography, force posture, and political objectives differ. Iran possesses significant missile capabilities, regional proxy networks, and influence stretching across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. The United States maintains extensive air, naval, and intelligence assets across the region, supported by alliances and advanced logistics. History shows that wars which begin as limited operations can evolve into prolonged campaigns. The 1991 Gulf War lasted weeks and achieved defined objectives. By contrast, the 2003 Iraq War shifted from rapid regime removal to years of insurgency. The difference was not only military capability, it was political clarity. In a contained scenario, the conflict remains limited. The United States conducts targeted strikes against military infrastructure. Iran retaliates through calibrated missile launches against regional bases. Avoiding civilian targets. Limiting escalation. Diplomatic channels remain open behind the scenes, often through intermediaries. Oman, Switzerland. Oil prices spike initially, but stabilize as shipping through the Strait of Hormuz continues. The campaign lasts weeks, perhaps a month. The war ends formally, but its aftershocks remain. Now consider a longer arc. Initial strikes expand. Objectives shift. Leadership rhetoric hardens. When conventional options narrow, asymmetric tools widen. Proxy groups increase activity across Iraq and Syria. Maritime harassment grows in the Gulf. Cyber operations probe financial systems and energy infrastructure. The battlefield expands beyond geography, into economics and cyberspace. In this scenario, Iran's strategy is not decisive victory. It is endurance, raising costs gradually. The conflict stretches into months, perhaps longer. If conflict extends beyond months, structural consequences appear. Regional alliances harden, defense budgets increase, missile defense networks expand. Globally, energy diversification accelerates. Europe pushes deeper into renewables. Asian economies expand strategic oil reserves. China and Russia recalibrate diplomatic positioning. Balancing influence, avoiding entanglement. Sustained oil price increases ripple through global economies. Transportation costs rise. Food production becomes more expensive. Manufacturing slows. Emerging markets feel the pressure first. Inside Iran, economic hardship deepens. Currency pressure intensifies. Infrastructure damage affects daily life. In the United States, war spending expands fiscal pressure. Public debate sharpens. What history suggests is that conflicts with unclear end states tend to last longer than anticipated. What current capability indicates is that both Iran and the United States possess the means to sustain operations beyond initial weeks. What remains uncertain is political will. Domestic tolerance for cost often defines duration more than battlefield momentum. What depends on leadership decisions is whether objectives remain limited or expand toward transformational goals. Escalation is neither guaranteed nor avoidable by default. It rests on communication, restraint, and perception. The margin between prolonged deterrence and widening war is thin.
What are your thoughts on today's analysis? We'd value your perspective. Share your insights respectfully in the comments below. Thoughtful discussion makes these conversations stronger. If you found this documentary informative and balanced, consider liking the video and subscribing for more in-depth global analysis. Until next time, thank you for watching.